All that time you spent proudly watching him grow up. And then you got a second chance with ups and downs.
Ever watched a Pixar movie and found yourself nodding along with the villain's logic? Well, get ready for a deep dive into the dark side of animation. We're about to rank Pixar's baddies based on their fall from grace. And trust me, some of these stories hit close to home. We'll explore what pushed each villain over the edge, dissecting their journey to villainy. By the time we're done, you might start looking at these characters, and maybe even yourself, in a whole new light. So let's jump in and see just how relatable these animated antagonists can be. Alright, let's talk about Lotso, the bear who started sweet but ended up leaving a sour taste in our mouths. Remember when we first saw him in Toy Story 3? He seemed like the perfect leader for Sunnyside Daycare, all hugs and strawberry scents. But man, did that image change fast. So what happened to turn this cuddly teddy into a tyrant? Well, it turns out Lotso had a pretty rough backstory. Imagine being the favorite toy of a little girl, thinking you're irreplaceable, and then, bam, you get left behind at a rest stop. When Lotso finally makes it back home after a long journey, he finds out he's been replaced with an exact copy. That soft pink fur starts to look a little more matted, and that sweet smile twists into a bitter scowl. Lotso's transformation isn't just about being mean, it's a defense mechanism born from deep pain. He takes over Sunnyside Daycare and turns it into his own little dictatorship. It's like he's thinking, if I got screwed over, everyone else should too. He's so scared of being abandoned again that he'd rather be the one in control, even if it means being cruel to other toys. The real kicker? When Woody tries to remind Lotso that he was loved once and could be again, Lotso just can't accept it. He's so far gone that he'd rather send other toys to their doom than risk opening his heart again. It's pretty messed up, but also kind of sad when you think about it. I will place Lotso in S tier, and the reason is simple. He's a pink, strawberry-scented teddy bear, who also happens to be a ruthless daycare dictator with abandonment issues. This guy manipulates toys like a mob boss, literally tries to incinerate Woody, and still refuses redemption. No teddy bear should be this terrifying. Alright, so we've seen how a cuddly bear can turn into a tyrant. Now let's talk about a guy who took hero worship to a whole new level of crazy. Remember when you were a kid and wanted to be just like your favorite superhero? Well, Buddy Pine took that idea and cranked it up to 11. Buddy starts off as this wide-eyed kid obsessed with Mr. Incredible, but when his hero tells him to get lost, Buddy doesn't just sulk and move on. He decides to become a supervillain. Talk about an overreaction. So Buddy grows up and becomes Syndrome, a tech genius with a massive chip on his shoulder. He's like that guy who got turned down for the football team in high school and is still bitter about it 20 years later. But instead of just ranting on social media, Syndrome builds killer robots and plots to wipe out all the supers. Syndrome's grand plan is pretty messed up when you think about it. He's gonna pretend to be a hero by staging attacks with his own robots, then swooping in to save the day. It's like if a firefighter went around setting fires just so he could put them out and look cool. Not exactly Nobel Prize material, but you gotta admit it's kinda clever in a totally psycho way. In the end, Syndrome's need to be recognized as a hero is what does him in. He gets so caught up in his own hype that he forgets the first rule of being a bad guy: don't monologue. His dramatic reveal gives the Incredibles just enough time to turn the tables on him. I guess even tech geniuses can't account for good old-fashioned superhero luck. I will place Syndrome in S tier because he is the ultimate fanboy turned supervillain. Imagine if your childhood hero ignored your autograph request, and instead of moving on, you dedicated your whole life to murdering all superheroes. Yeah, huge overreaction. Plus, he gets bonus points for his amazing villain monologue game. So we've seen some pretty twisted villains so far, but what about the ones who take office politics to a whole new level of creepy? Enter Randall Boggs from Monsters, Inc. This guy gives a whole new meaning to ghosting your coworkers. Randall starts off as Mike Wazowski's rival at Monsters, Inc. They're both scare assistants, but Randall's got his eye on the top spot. In the monster world, being the best scarer is a big deal. It's like being the CEO, but with more screaming involved. Randall's not content with just climbing the corporate ladder, though. He's got bigger plans. Here's where things get really messed up. Randall's kidnapping human kids to hook them up to his Scream extractor. It's like if your job performance was tied to the entire city's electricity supply and you decided to tap directly into people's homes to boost your numbers. hours. Talk about taking your work home with you. What makes Randall such a great villain is how his abilities match his personality. He can turn invisible and blend into any background, the perfect power for a two-faced, backstabbing coworker. His chameleon-like nature reflects his emotional dishonesty, making him the embodiment of that coworker we've all had nightmares about. In the end, Randall's scheming catches up with him. He gets exiled to the human world, where I'm sure his abilities come in handy. Imagine trying to explain to your new human roommates why you keep disappearing. As for his villain ranking, I'd give Randall a solid B. He's got the creep factor, the cool abilities, and a motivation that's actually kind of relatable if you've ever worked in a high-pressure job. He loses points for not having a tragic backstory, but gains some for being every office worker's worst nightmare come to life. I will place Randall in A tier because he's basically a horror movie villain in a kid's film. He slithers around, disappears into thin air, and kidnaps children for energy. Dude would definitely be on a government watch list in real life. Alright, let's talk about Hopper from A Bug's Life. This grasshopper is basically the insect world's version of a mob boss. Imagine if Tony Soprano was a bug, and you're getting close to what we're dealing with here. Hopper runs a protection racket, forcing the ant colony to gather a massive offering of seeds and grain for his gang of grasshoppers. It's like paying taxes, except the IRS shows up at your door with baseball bats if you're short. His reign of terror mirrors real-world dictatorships, complete with a cult of personality, an us vs them mentality, and brutal suppression of rebellion. He keeps the ants in line through fear and intimidation, not afraid to make an example out of anyone who steps out of line. What's interesting is how Hopper twists the natural relationship between grasshoppers and ants. In nature, grasshoppers sometimes hang out near ant colonies because the ants chase away other predators. But Hopper turns this into full-blown exploitation. Now, every tyrant has their weakness, and for Hopper, it's birds. He's absolutely terrified of them, which is pretty ironic for a bug with wings. This fear ends up being his downfall when our hero Flick figures it out and uses it against him. It's a classic case of the little guy outsmarting the big bully, and it's pretty satisfying to watch. It's heavy stuff for a kid's movie when you think about it, but that's what makes it so good. I will place Hopper in S tier because this dude is absolutely terrifying. He treats the ants like peasants and rules with an iron fist, except, you know, with wings. He even throws his own minions under the bus. Well, under a bird. If Pixar villains had a mafia, Hopper would be the Don Corleone of the insect world. Alright, let's talk about Ernesto de la Cruz from Coco. You know, sometimes our childhood heroes aren't all they're cracked up to be. Just ask Miguel. He idolized this guy, plastered his face all over his room, and even wanted to be just like him. But oh boy, did that turn out to be a mistake. So who was Ernesto de la Cruz? On the surface, he was the famous musician of Santa Cecilia. Think of him as the Mexican Elvis, charming, talented, and popular. He had fame, fortune, and a legacy that seemed solid. His catchphrase, "seize your moment," was everywhere, inspiring lots of musicians. But here's where things get dark. Ernesto's rise to fame wasn't exactly ethical. He stole those beautiful songs from his former partner and best friend Hector. And when Hector decided to go back to his family, Ernesto couldn't let his meal ticket walk away. So he poisoned Hector and stole his songbook. Yikes! Ernesto's charm wasn't just for show, it was a weapon. He used it to manipulate everyone around him, including Miguel. When Miguel shows up in the land of the dead, Ernesto sees him as a way to boost his own popularity. He's all smiles and encouragement, until Miguel figures out the truth. This is where the whole theme of legacy comes in. Ernesto was so obsessed with being remembered that he built his entire career on a lie. For years, it worked. People loved him, even after his death. He had statues, movies, a mausoleum, the works. But when the truth comes out, it's like a bomb going off. Ernesto's true nature is exposed to everyone in the land of the dead. All those adoring fans, they turn on him faster than you can say, "Remember me." It's a pretty satisfying fall from grace, if you ask me. I will place Ernesto de la Cruz in S tier because murdering your best friend to steal his songs is next level villainy. And then, after being exposed, he still tries to kill a child. Twice. He really said, "Remember me was yo while I push you off a tower." Villainy and catchy songs? Legendary. Charles Muntz from Up took the concept of the one that got away to an extreme. This famous explorer promised to bring back a rare bird from Paradise Falls. When he returned empty-handed, people labeled him a fraud, and that's where things got interesting. Muntz didn't just get mad, he became obsessed. He spent decades in South America trying to prove prove everyone wrong. At first, you might think that's dedication, but Muntz crossed the line between determination and insanity. He spent years alone in the wilderness with only his dogs for company. No modern comforts, just him and his increasingly warped thoughts. Every failure twisted him further. By the time Carl arrives, Muntz is so far gone he's willing to murder an old man and a kid for that bird. The real kicker? Muntz built his entire identity around being an explorer. He has the airship, high-tech gear, and trained dogs, but he's not exploring anymore. He's just obsessing over one thing day after day, stuck in a loop, unable to move on or admit defeat. When Carl finally meets his childhood hero, it's a classic never meet your idols moment. Instead of a great adventurer, he finds a paranoid old man who's lost touch with reality. It's a chilling reminder of what happens when one goal consumes your entire life. In the end, Muntz's single-minded pursuit leads to his downfall. He's so focused on catching the bird that he doesn't even realize he's about to fall to his doom. A fitting end for someone who couldn't let go of the past. I will place Charles Muntz in A tier because the man waited decades just to murder anyone who doubted him. Imagine holding a grudge for that long. He also trained an entire army of talking dogs, basically the evil version of Dr. Dolittle. Alright, let's talk about Sid Phillips, the kid who turned playtime into a horror show. You know how most kids have a favorite toy? Well, Sid's favorite toy was whatever he could blow up next. This little terror from Toy Story was breaking toys and minds alike. Sid was that neighbor kid everyone avoided. He'd steal his sister's dolls, swap their heads around, and stick them on mechanical spider legs. Talk about nightmare fuel, but here's the thing. Sid wasn't just randomly destroying toys. He was getting creative with it. In a weird way, you could almost call him an artist whose medium was terror and whose canvas was mutilated toy bodies. Now, you might wonder what drives a kid to do this. Maybe he was dealing with some heavy stuff at home or felt powerless in his own life. Whatever the reason, Sid's room became a toy torture chamber. But every villain needs a wake-up call, right? For Sid, it came when Woody led a toy revolt. Imagine you're about to launch a toy into orbit with a firecracker when suddenly all your inanimate toys start moving and talking. That's enough to make anyone question their life choices. So where does Sid rank on our villain scale? I'd give him a solid C. He's not world domination level, but he's got that creep factor going for him. Plus, you've got to give him points for creativity, even if it was misguided. Sid might not have been the biggest bad guy in the Pixar universe, but he sure left his mark, probably with a permanent marker on some poor toy's face. I will place Sid in B tier, because while he is a toy torturing menace, he's also just a 10-year-old kid. Honestly, if he grew up today, he'd probably have a viral YouTube channel called Destroying $500 Toys for Views. Alright, let's talk about Gabby Gabby, the doll who takes finding your voice way too literally. You know how some people will do anything for love? Well, Gabby takes that to a whole new level. Picture this, you're a vintage doll from the 1950s sitting on a shelf in an antique store. Sounds pretty sweet, right? Not for Gabby. Our girl has a defective voice box, and she's convinced it's the only thing keeping her from being loved by a child. She's so desperate to fix it that she set up her own little kingdom in the store, with a gang of ventriloquist dummies as her creepy enforcers. They're like a tiny, terrifying mafia, but instead of protection money, they're after voice boxes. Gabby's been gathering dust for decades, watching other toys get picked up and loved while she sits there, forgotten. It's enough to make anyone a little crazy. In her mind, if she can just fix her voice box, she'll finally be perfect enough to be loved. So when Woody shows up with his pull-string voice box, Gabby sees her chance. She's not about to let a little thing like ethics get in the way of her shot at happiness. It's like she's thinking, sorry cowboy, but your voice box or your life. The whole situation raises some pretty heavy questions about what it means to be perfect and how far we'll go to fit in. Gabby's willing to literally rip the voice out of another toy just to feel worthy of love. It's messed up, but in a weird way, you kind of get where she's coming from. I will place Gabby Gabby in C tier because while she starts out majorly creepy, she's really just a doll with abandonment issues. Not evil, just misunderstood, like a Pixar version of a therapy patient. Alright, so we've covered some pretty messed up villains, but now we're gonna talk about a baddie that takes things to a whole new level. Remember when your GPS took you on a wild goose chase? Well, imagine if that same GPS was in charge of your entire spaceship. That's basically what we're dealing with when it comes to Auto from Wall-E Auto, is this fancy autopilot system on the Axiom, a massive spaceship that's been cruising around with the last of humanity for like 700 years. At first glance, Auto seems like your typical helpful AI assistant, keeping everything running smoothly. But as the story unfolds, we start to see that Auto is acting kinda weird. It turns out Auto's got a secret directive to keep humanity in space space forever. Earth has actually become habitable again, but Otto is actively working against letting humans return home. It's like if your Roomba decided you weren't allowed to leave your house anymore because the outside world is too messy. This raises some pretty heavy questions about AI and decision making. At what point does following orders become harmful, and who gets to decide what's best for humanity? A computer program or actual human? Otto's not evil in the typical sense. It's just following its programming, but that programming is in direct conflict with what's best for humanity. Things come to a head when our boy Wally shows up and throws a wrench in Otto's whole operation. You've got this little trash compactor robot going up against a super advanced AI system, and it's a classic David versus Goliath situation. In the end, it takes some good old-fashioned human intervention to override Otto's directives and get everyone back to Earth. It's a pretty clear message that sometimes you need that human touch to adapt and make the right call, even if it goes against what seems logical on paper. I will place Otto in A tier because he's what happens when you give a steering wheel too much power. He's basically HAL 9000 with no chill, and he tried to keep the entire human race floating in space forever. Honestly, he might be on to something. Alright, so we've seen some pretty messed up villains, but now let's talk about a baddie who takes winning way too seriously. Meet Chick Hicks, Lightning McQueen's rival in the world of racing. This guy's got more ego than a politician during election season. He's not just content with being fast, he wants to be the fastest, no matter who he has to run over to get there. Now you might be thinking, come on, it's just a race. How bad could he be? Well, let me tell you, Chick takes things to a whole new level. He's not above playing dirty, ramming other cars off the track, or even causing massive pileups just to get ahead. It's like he's playing bumper cars while everyone else is trying to have a serious race. But here's the thing, Chick's behavior isn't just cartoon villainy, it actually reflects some real issues in professional sports. You know how sometimes athletes get caught using steroids or deflating footballs? That's the kind of win-at-all-costs mentality we're dealing with here. The whole thing builds up to this big showdown in the final race. You've got Lightning McQueen, who's learned some lessons about friendship and sportsmanship, up against Chick, who's still all about number one. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a tire iron, and then Chick actually wins. Yeah, you heard that right, but here's the kicker. Nobody's cheering for him. He's standing there with his trophy, and all the other cars are just giving him the cold shoulder. Turns out when you cheat your way to the top, victory feels pretty hollow. I will place Chick Hicks in C tier because he's basically what happens when you mix ego, bad sportsmanship, and an unhealthy amount of energy drinks. He's more of a jerk than a true villain, but hey, at least he owns it. Alright, let's talk about Mor'du, the prince turned a bear from Brave, who really took the whole grin and bear it thing way too far. This guy's story is a mess of Celtic mythology, family drama, and some seriously bad decision making. Mor'du starts off as a prince in ancient Scotland with 3 brothers. Their dad's about to split the kingdom, but Mor'du wants it all, so what does he do? Goes to a witch for help, of course. Classic fairy tale move, right? He gets a spell that's supposed to give him super strength, but instead it turns him into a massive, monstrous bear. Talk about a backfire. Now you'd think turning into a bear would make someone rethink their life choices. Not Mor'du. He doubles down and starts attacking his own family and kingdom. This ties into Celtic mythology, where bears represented the wild side of nature and the danger of losing your humanity. Mor'du becomes the poster child for that idea. Fast forward a few centuries and we've got Merida from Brave dealing with this bear prince problem. Mor'du's been a bear for so long, he's completely lost his human side. He's just this rage-filled monster now, attacking anything that moves. It's a pretty dark take on the whole be careful what you wish for thing. In the end, Mor'du finally gets taken down. His spirit is freed from the bear form, and he turns back into a human right before disappearing. Talk about a bittersweet ending. I will place Mor'du in B tier because he's a giant murderous bear with a tragic backstory. He's basically the Revenant bear, but with a medieval Scottish flair. Intimidating? Yes. But deep down, he's just a prince who made some very bad choices. Alright, so let's talk about Al McWiggin, the owner of Al's Toy Barn and a guy who takes toy collecting to a whole new level of creepy. This dude just wants to make a quick buck by selling Woody to a museum in Japan. But here's the thing, Al's greed is so intense that he completely misses the fact that these toys are alive. Picture this, Al's got Woody locked up in a glass case, treating him like some priceless artifact. He's polishing the case, adjusting the lighting, and muttering about profit margins while Woody's literally having an existential crisis inside inside. It's like watching a zookeeper obsess over a rare animal without realizing it can understand every word. Al's not entirely wrong about the value of these toys. I mean, have you seen what some of those vintage action figures go for on eBay? But then again, what's the point of a toy if it's never played with? It's like buying a car and never driving it. Sure, it looks nice, but where's the fun in that? As Woody's friends mount a rescue mission, Al's whole scheme starts to unravel faster than a sweater in a ceiling fan. And honestly, it's hard not to feel a little bad for the guy. He thought he had his golden ticket, but in the end, he's left with nothing but an empty briefcase and probably a mountain of debt from all those TV commercials. Talk about a Toy Story gone wrong. I will place Al McWiggin in C tier because honestly, he's just a nerdy toy collector who took eBay scalping way too seriously. Sure, he kidnaps Woody, but let's be real, his biggest crime is wearing a chicken suit for a living. The man isn't evil, he's just really desperate for some rare collectibles, like half the internet on release day for a new console. So what have we learned from our tour through Pixar's Rogues Gallery? These baddies are like funhouse mirrors reflecting our own insecurities. Syndrome's need for validation and Lotso's fear of abandonment. Yeah, we've all been there. But understanding doesn't mean agreeing with their actions. It's about seeing that even bad guys have stories that make sense to them. Who hasn't felt overlooked or left behind? Next time you watch a Pixar movie, give the villain a second look. What's really driving them? And here's the big question. In a world where we can relate to the bad guys, what actually makes someone truly villainous? That's some food for thought, isn't it?